Center for Ethics, Lawrence Lessig.
And little known fact, he played for Pink Floyd a couple years, right?
Oh, that too.
That's why we're playing the music.
Famously.
Professor Lessig is author of the new book, Republic Lost, How Money Corrupts Congress, and a plan to stop it. So first, let's set the table, as we say, and give us a sense of how serious the money issue is in Congress.
Well, you could start with what the public perceives, which is the vast majority, 2/3 or 3/4, depending on the poll, believes money bias results in Congress. And that's alone enough to drive most people to think that this institution's bankrupt, which is why its confidence ratings hover around 10 or 11%. But the actual fact is the public isn't so stupid. Money does affect results in Congress. It steers it in ways that corrupts it away from what the people would ordinarily want. And more interestingly, recently, it's begun to direct the agenda so that the very things that they consider spend their time on the Hill are the things that are going to flush the most money.
So it's gotten worse.
Like how?
I thought we passed McCain-Feingold, and that was going to make everything cleaner in Washington. But you say since that passed, it's actually gotten worse?
It's gotten worse because McCain-Feingold's strategy was just to dampen down the sources, which makes it more and more ferocious to try to figure ways around the problem. So long as you're trying to restrict the money that goes in a world where people are more and more competitive and need to raise more money and spend more money, you're not going to solve the problem.
So what's the answer?
Well, you got to find a way to fund the elections that don't actually make the funders a tiny selection of America who get to distort the way the process works. So you've got to have systems like Arizona or Maine or Connecticut where small dollar contributions get amplified in a way that make it possible for candidates to run successful campaigns.
Okay, I'm glad you brought up Arizona because Arizona has some of the toughest campaign finance laws. I had a friend, Matt Salmon, who ran for governor, I think, in 2002, and Matt was raising it $500 at a time. It was very tough. And the last week of the campaign, a multimillionaire came in and put up $3-4 million in independent expenditures and washed Matt away, elected Janet Napolitano.
Yeah, and so long as the Supreme Court's doctrine limiting the ability to control elections in that way stands, this is going to be a problem with any change that we have. But I think we've got to start with a change that makes it possible. So in Connecticut, 88% of candidates in the first year opted into this system. We've got to start with a change that's possible so that people can begin to have some faith that this is just not another bought institution. As absolutely, I too was down on the Occupy Wall Street and Occupy K Street, as absolutely every one of those people down there believe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wes.
Now, I know during the 2008 election you were supportive of the president. I know this was something that he had talked about addressing. Have you been disappointed by the amount of progress that you've seen thus far?
This is understatement, right? This is yeah. I think the word is betrayal. I think the word is betrayal. I mean, he was a colleague of mine, a friend, and I have enormous respect for him. But he came in. The only reason to support him over Hillary Clinton was he said this was the fight. He said, I'm going to, quote, take up the fight to change the way Washington works. It was because of this challenge, he said, that he was running. So when you set yourself up as the reform candidate and then on day one pick up the Hillary Clinton playbook and run the administration the way she would have run it, and maybe she would have run it better than he, but the point is he did not have a plan or implement a plan to change the system, and that's why we're facing exactly the same ridiculous questions about how to run the system right now. And he's in the middle of the fight that you were talking about earlier in the show, where of course he's got to raise money from Wall Street, but so long as we have a system where the tiny slice of the most wealthy institutions in America drive funding for elections, that's exactly the blackmail the system's going to deliver.
John Heilman, the 1% does not run elections. It is 0.05% of America runs national elections. That's not the case in congressional races. It's not the case in some Senate races. It's not even, but when you're running for President of the United States, it's the 0.05% that determine whether you're
How do you stop the blackmail?
president or not.
I mean, seriously.
You've got to have a system where there isn't such concentrated power to blackmail. I mean, Wall Street did effectively blackmail to block any effective reform. I think that's absolutely clear, as you were saying earlier. So that's because they had the largest chunk of change in this last 2010 election. And so long as you fund elections so that that's possible, blackmail is possible, blackmail will happen.
Now, John Heilman and you have a history. Apparently,
Let's not go into that.
No, seriously, some hateful barbs being shot back and forth. What happened?
We don't want to start a fist fight here. But I have a big question for you, right? So, in the end of this book, you're not talking just about trying to reform campaign finance. You want to have a new constitutional convention. You're talking about root and branch reform, right? So, right now, a lot of people who think the system is paralyzed would like to start with something small like filibuster reform in the Senate. No headway is made on an issue that small relative to the large issues that you're talking about. So tell me in a practical way, how do we get to the kind of big-time structural reform that you advocate in the book?
Well, I think the big-time structural reform is called for because the inside the Beltway plan cannot work. We cannot get this Congress, to change the way it funds its system. As Jim Cooper says, Congress capital has become a farm league for K Street, so people are keen and fixed on saving the system as it is. So you need a way around, and so all I'm talking about that part of the book is here are the structural ways we can go around. What gets us to that place? Furious anger that develops in a way that begins to focus on real reform. So this movement, Occupy Wall Street movement, matures in a way that they begin to talk to the 99%. And the 99% only care, if you want to talk about what everybody cares about, only cares about this one issue, this corruption that they believe makes this system work.
I totally agree. The book is Republic Lost. Lawrence Lessig, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for being here
Your
and
son
coming
is
even
adorable.
after you found